Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're tackling a listener request that gets into some really tricky territory. We're trying to get a handle on what's been happening in Maine regarding schools, parental rights, and, well, gender identity policies.
Yeah, it's definitely a complex area. We're grounding this discussion in an interview transcript, focusing specifically on one mother's story.
Right, her experience with her daughter's school, parental notification or the lack thereof, and it also touches on these school-based health clinics in Maine more broadly.
So our goal here is really to unpack this specific situation. What actually happened? What were the parents' core concerns?
And how did the school and maybe other authorities respond? What wider issues does this whole thing bring up?
Exactly. It's about understanding the different facets of this based on the account we have.
Okay, so let's start where the mother's story begins. She describes finding a breast binder.
In her 13-year-old daughter's room, which, as you said, isn't something most parents would just stumble upon.
Not at all. And after some, I imagine, difficult conversations, it came out that this binder was given to her daughter by a social worker at the school.
A 26-year-old transgender social worker who was conditionally licensed. And the key point here.
No parental notification, none at all.
Right. And that immediately flags this tension, doesn't it? Between what the school sees as support and what parents see as their domain, their child's health, identity, major life decisions.
Absolutely. Providing something like a binder without even a heads up to the parents.
It steps right into that sensitive area.
So the mother approaches the school, understandably concerned, and she says she was met with, well, a lack of transparency, a real wall.
The school's first reaction, according to her account, was basically that the social worker hadn't done anything wrong.
Just dismissed her concerns.
Seemingly, yeah. And then when she asked for her daughter's records, to see what exactly had been discussed, what happened.
They initially refused.
They did. First, they apparently cited the daughter's request for privacy.
For a 13-year-old, that seems unusual.
It does. And then later, the reason shifted to FERPA, the Federal Education Privacy Law.
So the reasoning changed. It sounds like from the mother's perspective, they were actively blocking her from getting information about her own child.
That's certainly how she seems to have perceived it. And while FERPA protects student records, it generally grants parents access rights for minors. So the school's reluctance is, well, it's notable. It created suspicion.
And then there are the specific concerns about the social worker themselves. This gets pretty layered.
It does. The mother mentioned the conditional license, the person's relative inexperience, and also their background in activism.
And she raised this idea of countertransference. Like, she was worried the social worker's own identity and experiences might be influencing things.
Right. Whether their own journey was shaping how they interacted with her daughter, who, the mother says, hadn't shown prior signs of gender distress beyond maybe some androgynous clothing.
But maybe the most striking part is the timeline.
Yeah, the speed.
According to the mother, this social worker had only interacted with her daughter for about 70 minutes total. 70. Before allegedly providing underwear, starting to use a male name and he/him pronouns at school for the daughter.
After just over an hour of conversation.
Yeah.
That does seem incredibly fast for interventions that constitute steps towards a social transition at school, especially without any parental input.
It raises serious questions about professional judgment and process, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Appropriate support is one thing, but initiating these kinds of changes so quickly and seemingly unilaterally, it's ethically complex, to say the least, when dealing with minors.
So, faced with all this, the mother decides to keep her daughter home from school.
A pretty drastic step, but maybe understandable given her perspective.
And she tries to take her concerns higher up to the school board. How did that go?
According to her account, not well. She described it as basically futile.
Just couldn't get anywhere.
Pretty much. Initial attempts got a sort of general non-response, took weeks to even get pointed towards the board chair, and even then, she felt a real conversation was avoided.
That lack of engagement from the board itself, if accurate, suggests maybe a bigger issue, right? Not just one interaction, but maybe how the system responds or fails to respond.
It could certainly erode trust. When parents bring forward serious concerns like this about their child's welfare and potential medical implications, you'd hope for meaningful dialogue. A failure to engage can seem like they're prioritizing something else over open communication.
Okay, and then the story takes another turn, something the mother calls curious timing.
Yes, this involves Child Protective Services, CPS.
Right after she filed formal complaints about the social worker's licenses.
CPS opens an investigation into her family.
Wow. The implication being that her challenging the school led directly to the state investigating her parenting.
That's certainly the timing she points out. And understandably, she says this caused immense fear and stress. Imagine having CPS called on you simply for questioning school staff actions.
Absolutely terrifying. What was the outcome of the CPS investigation?
Ultimately, the investigator concluded there were no, quote, egregious issues. The case was closed.
Okay. But still, the chilling effect.
Exactly. And what makes it even more concerning, potentially, is that she mentions another mother in the same district, who also raised concerns about the same social worker, apparently faced a similar CPS investigation.
The same social worker.
Yeah.
And another CPS call.
That's the claim in the source, which really makes you question if these were isolated events or potentially a pattern of response.
Using CPS as a tool against dissenting parents, that's a very serious allegation.
Extremely serious. CPS is meant to protect children from actual harm, not, to manage parental disagreement with school policy. If that's what was happening, it's deeply problematic.
This whole situation then seems to broaden out in the interview, connecting to these school-based health clinics in Maine.
Right. On the surface, they sound convenient healthcare right there in the school.
Makes sense.
But the interviewee raises flags about the scope of what they can do. Things like mental health counseling, maybe even prescriptions.
Potentially without parents knowing or consenting.
That's the concern raised. She gives this pretty alarming example of a child supposedly being sent home from one such clinic with an unlabeled bag.
Unlabeled?
Yeah, which turned out to contain Zoloft, an antidepressant.
Wow. Sent home with medication, unlabeled, potentially without parental consent.
If true, that's obviously a huge red flag regarding safety, consent, and communication protocols. It raises major questions about these clinics operating within schools and dispensing medications.
And the interview even brings up potential financial motives.
It does touch on that. It mentions that for some clinics, a very high percentage of their revenue, like 70 or 80%, might come from prescription drugs.
So if they make most of their money from prescriptions,
it naturally leads to questions about incentives. Is the focus purely on student health, or could financial factors influence prescribing practices?
Yeah, that's a potential conflict of interest you'd want to be very careful about. You need medical decisions based purely on the child's best interest, with parents involved, not driven by revenue.
Absolutely crucial. Transparency around funding and practice is key there.
The conversation in the source also mentions a referral to the Barbara Bush Gender Clinic.
Yes, which, given the context of the binder and the social worker's actions, maybe isn't surprising, but it leads to a wider point.
About policy changes in Maine.
Exactly. Specifically, changes to Medicaid rules in the state.
What changed?
Medicaid there now apparently covers elective sex change procedures for minors. That includes things like puberty blockers.
So these kinds of medical interventions for minors could potentially be funded by taxpayers in Maine.
That seems to be the case according to the source. And this is, of course, a really contentious area nationally.
Huge debate.
Proponents argue it's necessary healthcare access for transgender youth. Critics worry about, long-term effects, the capacity of minors for informed consent for potentially irreversible treatments, and the role of parents.
And the public funding adds yet another dimension to that debate.
Definitely.
So, given everything that happened, this mother took legal action.
Yes, she filed a federal lawsuit backed by the Goldwater Institute.
And the core of the lawsuit is what?
It really centers on parental rights. The fundamental right of parents, they argue, to direct the upbringing and health care of their children.
Makes sense. Where is that case now?
It's gone up to the First District Appeals Court. And the source mentions the possibility it could even reach the Supreme Court eventually.
That really highlights how significant this is legally. There isn't clear agreement on these issues.
Not at all. It's a clash between evolving ideas about gender, minors' rights, and those established parental rights. The outcome could set major precedents for schools everywhere.
What really struck me was the advice this mother gives to other parents.
It felt very direct and empowering.
She basically says, you're not alone if you're going through this. It's okay to ask hard questions, to push back.
And crucially, that you have the right to change doctors or providers if you feel you're not being heard or if you feel pressured.
Yeah, she mentions her own experience with a nurse practitioner who she felt was pushing her towards the gender clinic, and she filed a complaint about that too.
It really emphasizes that parents need to be advocates, trust their instincts about their own kids, and not feel railroaded.
It's a strong message about agency.
Definitely. And about the need for truly informed consent and open dialogue in healthcare settings around these topics.
And finally, the interviewee touches on the political side of things, her perspective on how this has maybe shifted alignments.
Yeah, she talks about her own experience, feeling that the Democratic Party's stance on these kinds of issues has moved in a direction that made her, and potentially others with more moderate views, reconsider their political home.
So these issues, parental rights, gender identity in schools, are not just legal or social debates, they're actually influencing how people identify politically.
That seems to be her observation.
Right.
It reflects that broader dynamic where cultural issues around family, identity, and rights are really powerful forces in politics today. When people feel fundamental rights, like parental rights, are being challenged by a party's platform, it can definitely cause shifts.
So wrapping up this deep dive, the situation in Maine is just incredibly complex, isn't it? It really brings together parental rights, school policies, how we understand gender identity, all clashing in this one family's experience.
It really does. And it starkly highlights how crucial communication and transparency are between schools and parents. When that breaks down, the consequences can be significant and deeply personal.
Yeah, you see the potential fallout.
And this case forces us to ask some tough questions, doesn't it? What is the appropriate role for schools when it comes to a child's social identity, potential medical transitions?
Where are the lines drawn between school support and parental authority? How do we make sure school health services are properly overseen?
The legal battle just underscores that we don't have easy answers or consensus right now. The stakes are incredibly high for everyone involved: families, kids, educators.
So as we finish up, we really encourage you, the listener, to think about these perspectives. How do these issues play out in your own community, maybe in your own experiences?
Where do you think that balance lies between what schools do and what parents decide? How can we protect both the well-being of children and the fundamental rights of parents?
It's definitely an ongoing conversation, a really vital one. And thoughtful engagement from everyone is just essential as we navigate this.
Well, Amber, thank you very much for coming in. We didn't plan it this way, but just so happens that we're talking on the day that the Department of Justice has announced that it's going to be suing the state of Maine for refusing to comply with Title IX laws. And I think longtime readers of the Maine Wire will be familiar with your story and how it relates to the current fight over transgender ideology in the state of Maine. But it's not directly related to the sports issue, but in a way it is. And so I think probably the first thing is just to welcome you as one of our first guests here in the studio, but to catch people up on your background and what kind of brought you into politics as somebody who was kind of on the left, not really a political being, kind of found yourself through the steps you had to take to protect your family, thrust into a political position now to the point where you're going to these rallies and you're kind of, I guess, on the Mount Rushmore of activist moms at the front lines of this fight against transgender ideology. At least in Maine, I would say you're up there. So tell us a little bit about your background and the circumstances that kind of led to you going before the Damerscott School Board and airing your grievances with certain policies that they had.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Lovely to be here. So my background, I grew up in northern Maine. I, as you said, tended politically anyway to lean a little bit more left, especially socially. I own a mental health agency. Those types of career choices generally are people who tend to lean a little bit left. But as you know, my daughter was manipulated and abused by a social worker at her school, which for me, the only reaction I could have was to make noise about this once I realized that the school was not interested in exploring trying to mend fences and trying to help my daughter through this and work with me. And so yeah, I started talking to people like you. Actually, you were one of the first people that I spoke to. And I quickly realized that this isn't going away unless we really start to make noise. And so I really started to do research is really what happened, because that's just who I am as a person. I really just started to dig into gender ideology, partially because I wanted to understand my daughter and what she was experiencing, what she was being told by adults. And I quickly realized that this really, in my opinion, is probably the biggest medical scandal of human existence. And so I just feel compelled to tell my story and my daughter's story so that people see that side and how children are being manipulated, because for me that's the most egregious part, is that we're celebrating medicalizing children for elective surgeries. It's wild to me that we've gotten here. So
I guess, I've thought about your story and your daughter's story a lot as different things and scandals and confrontations have come up, and it seems like you had a fork in the road moment. And it's a fork in the road moment for your daughter's life, where there's one path that she could have gone down, which was the path the school wanted to take her down, which would have been life-altering hormones, potentially surgery, whatever social and psychological things are going on, and you kind of mama beared it and stepped in and were like, no.
I felt like I had to, that fork, there was no way I was going this way. Like, there was never a moment where I thought to myself, maybe perhaps this is the best path for my child. Never did I consider. I knew that this was not okay, and we had to pump the brakes and have some serious conversations with one another. And so yes, definitely fork in the road moment. And then as community members began to attack me and the school tried to silence me, I could have burrowed down in a cave or something, but I really struggle with injustices in general. And so when I continued to see that they were going to continue to try to silence me, I knew that I had to fight, not just for my family, but to ensure other families don't go through it, because this rocks your world. And I know families all across this country at this point who have experienced very similar things. And the common underlying theme with all of them, in my experience, is there's always at least one adult that is grooming this child. And I hate that term, to be honest with you. I hate the term grooming, but that's what's happening. These kids are being led down this path. These aren't
coached. Trained,
coached,
encouraged, counseled.
These aren't ideas that kids just populate on their own. And all of these families, the common theme is that an adult in the child's life led them down this really bizarre pathway.
So let's talk about, I guess, the kind of the specifics of your story, how you uncovered what was happening at the school. So your daughter at the time has just turned 13, and you discovered that there was some counseling going on that the school never told you about, that you weren't aware of. So you'd been cut out of counseling decisions, medical decisions made about your daughter's life. So how did you discover that, and what did you do after you learned what was happening?
So we were cleaning her bedroom. I feel like I've told this story so many times, but I know there are probably people listening who haven't heard the story. So we were cleaning her bedroom, and I found a breast binder in her bedroom. So I asked her where it came from, and it took some time, but she eventually told me that it was a social worker at the school.
I'm guessing as a mom, you know every piece of clothing that your daughter has.
Yes,
so it's not like she just
absolutely.
randomly comes up with a new item of clothing that
definitely not.
She went shopping at TJ Maxx or something on her own.
Exactly. And so it was a tough conversation. But she eventually told me, came from this social worker at school. And in talking with her, I realized that it wasn't the social worker that I had previously had a conversation with. So the previous year, I had a conversation with a social worker at the school about some anxiety my daughter was experiencing. That was a female social worker. They, early in her 8th grade year, transitioned her to working with this transgender social worker, so presenting male-born female social worker. And
who was 26 years old, conditionally licensed from the University of Maine, that barely finished their social work program, and a long train of activism at the university. So
yeah, and I think too, like you mentioned that he was 26. As a 26-year-old person, making a phone call to a parent about something difficult probably feels a little heavy and overwhelming. It's much easier to not do that, which is...
that's a step you want to skip. I imagine a 26-year-old man calling to have a conversation about a 13-year-old's developing body.
Yeah, and probably wanted to avoid that piece, and therefore he did.
Well, he should have avoided it together. We wouldn't be in this position if he just avoided the topic altogether.
Yes,
but
I think he should avoid social working altogether, in my opinion. I think what he experienced is something called countertransference. It's when you're working with a client, you begin to push your feelings, your experiences onto your client. And I think that he experienced that with my daughter. My daughter has always dressed fairly androgynously, which is fine. Tomboys. I was a tomboy, you know? And I think that he saw something in her that reminded him of himself when he was a young girl. And therefore, he really started to push this ideology on my child. That's conjecture. I don't know for sure that that's what happened, but in my experience in working in the mental health field, that's just a phenomenon that happens, and you have to be self-aware enough when you're beginning to experience that perhaps you can't work with that client. I think that he should have been self-aware enough to say, I can't work with this child. I'm not doing appropriate work. Again, I prefer that he just leave the social working field altogether. I don't think he's providing quality care to people, but.
And so you found the breast binder. So it's a medical device aimed at concealing the appearance of a young woman's breasts to help facilitate a social transition. And you go to the school with it with some questions.
Lots of questions.
So what happens then?
So initially they heard me out. You know, this all happened on a Friday, so I met with them Monday. The superintendent and the principal, whose contract just did not get renewed, by the way. I don't know if you caught that. I know.
No, I hadn't been following. I hadn't been following the resignation of every other party involved in this story.
I know. So yeah, they did not renew her contract. Very interesting. Many people have reached out asking me if I know why. I have my own feelings and thoughts. But anyway, so they heard me out, met with the social worker on Tuesday. Meanwhile, I told them my child won't
Which
be going
one, the
back to
original
school.
social worker or
No.
the
transgender social worker.
All right.
So I said my child won't be going back to school until this is resolved. So keeping my kid home. I meet back with the superintendent and the assistant superintendent on Wednesday. And very blunt, like, no, we're not doing anything about this. The social worker did nothing wrong. I then said, I want copies of her records, conversations that she had with this person. No, you cannot receive those records. I still don't have those records. Even when my daughter requested those records.
They wouldn't turn the medical records over to your daughter?
No.
Or you?
No, it's wild. So I still don't have those records. I have dates in which they met, which led me to realize that he met with my daughter for about an hour and 10 minutes altogether before he moved forward with giving her underwear. You know, like he gave my daughter underwear.
26-year-old public school employee met with your daughter for 70 minutes and gave her underwear.
Yeah, and you know, led her down this path to believe she was a boy, began, you know, in the hallways calling her by a male name and using he, him pronouns. So because they didn't really react the way that I wanted to, I said, I'll be homeschooling my daughter now. And I spoke at the school, in front of the school board. And the only comment I got was, thank you for your comment. Nobody followed up with me. Nobody reached out for weeks. I did have one school board member eventually reach back out to me and just ask me if my situation had gotten resolved. And when I replied to her, she said, you need to speak to Sam Belknap, who was the school board chair.
Is that the man bun?
Yes. Yes, that would be him. And so I didn't continue to pursue that, obviously, because it was an act of futility at that point to even attempt to try and engage in a conversation with the school board.
Like the first time you brought it to them, they came down on the side of, it's our policy to cut parents out of these kind of decisions. You don't have access to these records. Nothing we did was wrong.
Correct. And when they wouldn't give me access to the records, they initially said, your daughter requested that we keep these private. So that's interesting. My daughter would like to meet with you with my brother, who's a teacher. So I figured another adult that isn't me, so I'm not forcing her to say these things, would like to meet with you to request these records. They then shifted gears and said, oh, FERPA is actually the reason that you can't have these records.
FERPA protects the records from being released even to the student?
Apparently. I know. Very, very bizarre, very strange behavior from the school, for sure.
It seems like they're just kind of making things up to, this seems like cover your ass behavior.
Oh, 1,000%.
It's a technical term. It's a technical legal term, but this seems like CYA.
It really is, yeah.
So, I think for any parent in that situation, one, this idea that there's stuff going on with your child that you weren't aware of or weren't able to protect them from, it's a scary experience, and speaking out, risking becoming a pariah in Damascotta, Maine, which is a very small community, leans left, lots of like elderly, blue-haired, retired people, liberals, the ones who are waving Pride Progress flags at the State House right now to protest Trump. But I feel like it got another level of scary when child welfare became involved.
Yeah. I know you're not a parent, but it was one of the scariest, and it's still like, that weighs on me that somebody reported potential abuse or neglect in my home.
Right after you complained about the secret grooming of your daughter.
Correct.
They sent child services into your home.
Yeah, so I had placed complaints on both the social workers' licenses, which a lot of people don't know you can do, but you can do that. You can place a complaint on a social worker's license. So I think it was 4 to 6 days after I placed the complaint, CPS was knocking on my door.
That's curious timing.
It is very curious timing, isn't it?
And to be clear, the threat when CPS is knocking on your door is that they're going to take your kids away if this doesn't go well.
Absolutely.
So for intervening and stopping the secret grooming of your child, the state threatened to take your child away.
Yes, absolutely. I felt very grateful that the worker who came to my home acknowledged that my kids, she was at my house for over 3 hours interviewing me, my husband, my daughter, chatting with my then 4-year-old and 2-year-old. Thankfully, she acknowledged that nothing egregious was happening. But if
there's no guarantee that you didn't have another activist child welfare service. Not that the child welfare services national viewers won't understand just how messed up it's been in the state of Maine. But we've had record numbers of child deaths. Mm-hmm. In cases where the state has intervened, has been involved, record numbers of children dying back-to-back years. It's like the trajectory is awful. So the idea that they can't keep children who are in like crack houses safe, but they've still got the time to spend 3 hours investigating whether or not you're properly I don't know.
Using the correct pronouns.
Yeah.
And yeah. I know. I've said that to multiple people. The resources should be here. These children desperately need help. Some of these kids desperately need to be yanked out of these homes and placed elsewhere. And they're spending time investigating me. And that's one of the frustrating things about the report. It was such a narcissistic move. But I don't know who actually made the report. I can ascertain who made the report.
I got some suspicions.
I have some thoughts about it.
It could be one of the 3 employees of that school district who now aren't employees of that school district.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, they're taking resources away where they're desperately needed, investigating parents who are, I was just standing up for my kid. I wanted to pull my kid away from abuse.
There was also, there was another mother in the district who saw your testimony and said, just so you know, I don't want this social worker working with my kid. And she was also investigated.
Yes.
So it's very obvious that there was a pattern here. The two moms in the school system who complained about the transgender social worker got Child Protective Services sicked on them.
Yeah.
And it's a pattern statewide. We've reported on a father who found a baggie of Zoloft that his daughter was sent home with from one of the school-based clinics. Mm-hmm. And when he complained about that, he had Child Protective Services sent after him. So, it'd be it's crazy to say, but it'd be one thing if they were weaponizing Child Protective Services and still keeping the other kids safe. But,
sure.
They can't do either.
Yeah.
Their kids are getting killed, and they're weaponizing Child Protective Services to carry out this weird, fetish-based politics.
Yeah.
It's bizarre to understand. So, I guess you've had this moment confronting the school. You speak out at the school board. I think the Maine Wire is kind of part of the story because we reported on it. And
Definitely.
The story went insanely viral. There were like Spanish news networks talking about your story. And eventually you get legal representation through the Goldwater Institute, and you guys are now kind of mired in a federal lawsuit that's going back and forth. I mean, I don't want to get into the specifics of the legal issues. I think
Sure.
like if you have any moral sense whatsoever, you know who's in the right and who's in the wrong here.
Sure.
And the fact that you're talking and the others are all hiding
and
and
I've said that
have deleted their social media, I think it tells you everything you need to know. But what is the latest with the case? Is this going to be a Supreme Court type situation?
Potentially. So we went to First District Appeals Court in October. So we're waiting right now. We're just waiting on that ruling. They could grant the motion to dismiss by the school, like the judge in Maine did. If that's the case, it will land in the Supreme Court. We will appeal, or we could move to discovery, which is what we're hoping for, is to move to discovery. What a lot of people don't realize, and I didn't either, because I've never really gone through the court systems.
Yeah, you didn't think you were going to have to sue an entire school district because they were grooming your daughter.
Right.
Silly you.
I know. My daughter will likely be 18 before this lawsuit, pretty close to it, before this lawsuit really fully plays out. And It's wild how long it takes to get justice. It's part of why I make so much noise. I have to do something with this energy.
Yeah. Well, in some ways you've won the lawsuit. But I think that the principle at the core of it is whether or not parents have a constitutionally protected right to be involved in healthcare decisions that affect their children. And the Mills administration, the Democrat, I guess, far left, their basic point is that no, the schools are the ones who should have the right.
Well, and that's part of why these school-based health clinics are such a bad idea.
Yeah.
And they kind of hide that under the guise of, well, it's all inclusive. Parents don't have to take time out of their day to bring their child to the doctor and whatnot. And so many people say, oh, they wouldn't give children hormones at school. This wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
As you said, you've reported on an antidepressant being sent home with a child. Those drugs are serious business. They can cause suicidal ideation, not to mention in a sandwich baggie.
Yeah, I mean they say it on the on the commercials. Every time there's a
Right.
Zoloft commercial, there's that happy guy dancing along, and it's like could cause suicidal thoughts. It's like,
Right.
hold on a second, that's not what I was sad. Why am I taking these pills?
Right, exactly. And so these clinics are a pipeline for this mess, and so many people.
Well, they're a pipeline for money too.
That too.
kind of shows the motives here. Like when you have to ask yourself, what's the motive of the people who are advocating for some of this stuff? Like, some of these superintendents or school administrators, they just want to be like the best version they saw in the HR film.
Sure.
Like, the HR trainings that the Department of Education puts on everybody is like, here's how a good school administrator like does all the pronouns and stuff, and they just want to like follow the rules. Then there are the individuals like the social worker who might be engaging in this kind of transference and, kind of some social, activism, whatever. But then there's the profit motive. And that's what we're getting at with these school-based clinics. And I don't know if these are a national phenomenon, but there's dozens and dozens of them in the state of Maine. And I really first encountered them with Lawrence High School. It was this issue with a father who came to me with photographic evidence. He had the pills. It was an unlabeled baggie of Zoloft, which is a felony. That's
right.
felony prescription drug trafficking, by the way. That this clinic has just engaged in. I don't know where the investigation is into that, but the school-based clinics become a difficult thing to investigate from a journalistic perspective, and I'm guessing also from a law enforcement perspective, because when you ask the school, hey, why are you guys sending home like 15-year-old girls with unlabeled baggies of drugs? Which I feel like is a reasonable question, something they should answer. They say, oh, that's not us. That's a totally separate entity.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I mean, it's the Bulldog Clinic, and it's on your website, and it's on your campus, and it's like just down the hall from your office.
Right.
But they've got this legal plausible deniability where that's totally separate thing.
Yeah.
That's Health Reach. That's a nonprofit hospital or medical office or whatever. So they're trying to open up several of these and Gardner, I think, is the latest attempt at opening one of these. But when we pulled their filings, we saw that it was a huge share of their revenue. Like 70% or 80% of their revenue was prescription drugs.
It's wild. And it's not surprising. We're in an age where everybody needs to have a diagnosis. There's like social currency in it. Like these kids go to school and, oh, I have anxiety, borderline personality disorder is the latest one, and there is nothing cool about that diagnosis. That is a human who is suffering, and it is not cool. And so I think we're living in this day and age where there's a pill for everything. I mean, these new weight loss drugs that everybody's taking. I think that eventually we're all just going to be medicated. That's just how things are going to operate. And so
they'll put Ozempic in the water like fluoride.
And therefore we're breeding unhealthy behaviors, because really, if you need to lose weight, perhaps change your diet, focus on getting a good night's sleep, exercise a little bit, but instead we're just creating a pill for everything. And so I'm not surprised when you tell me the revenue share is that high when it comes to prescription medications. That was one of the first things discussed with me when my daughter began to struggle with anxiety. And then of course, when the whole gender thing cropped up, they wanted to send me to the gender clinic. They put in a referral to the gender clinic. I never took my daughter there.
This would be the Barbara Bush
yes
gender clinic. I'm sure Barbara would be super thrilled to know what's going on at the Barbara Bush gender clinic.
I know.
But we actually got the records, because Governor Mills, as much as she talks about the rule of law and following the law, she unilaterally changed Medicaid rules in the state of Maine to allow healthcare providers to cover elective sex change procedures. And we can see the amount of billing and procedures that are happening at the Barbara Bush Children's Hospital. Now, we can't, I guess, infer from that they're all children, but they're at the Children's Hospital.
Right.
And they're having elective surgeries funded by the taxpayers, and they're getting hystrelin implants originally developed for prostate cancer, but are now puberty blockers. So this is happening.
It is.
Taxpayers are paying for it in the state of Maine. And if it's that common in the Medicaid, the people with Medicaid for insurance, I imagine how much popular it is with the commercially insured.
Yeah.
But so I guess one thing, you mentioned all the people that you've connected with and the kind of journey that you've had doing research or trying to learn. I guess what would you say to moms, parents generally, who are at where you were when you started? If they want to learn more, if they want to, I don't know. I guess what do you wish you knew now then that you know now?
My gosh, I think first off, you're not alone, and I mean, some parents are just going along with this. I think it's really scary and sad for the kids.
We talked with Chloe Cole a few weeks ago, and that was exactly her circumstance. Her parents did not want to go along with it.
Right.
And were browbeat by a doctor.
And that's part of the scary thing. I had an experience with a nurse practitioner who tried to bully me into taking my daughter to the gender clinic. I placed a complaint on her license as well. You do have power. You are this child's parent, and it is okay to ask questions, and it is okay to raise concern, and change medical providers if you have to. Do not continue to send your daughter to a doctor that isn't willing to have a conversation with you other than suicide.
Yeah.
And
so that's what the nurse practitioner told you?
The nurse practitioner first off had a very long conversation about Maslow and the hierarchy of needs. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
And so I started to ask questions about why 11-year-olds were discussing sexuality so heavily. One of her friends began identifying as poly, which I had to Google. I didn't know what it meant. And
for a second I thought you were talking like Polly, like from Goodfellas. I was like, what?
Polyamorous, yes.
Of course. How could we forget? We should actually, we're paying for those out Maine gender posters through our taxes. We should get one to hang up in here in the studio, just in case we need to reference.
Seriously.
It'll help us understand the upcoming Miss Maine beauty pageant.
Oh my gosh. Yes, it would give us the vocabulary for sure. So I said, why are these kids so fixated on sexuality? They haven't even had a sexual awakening yet. And she said, this isn't about sexuality. I'm like, can you read me the definition of polyamorous? Because that sounds like sexuality to me.
Yeah, it seems like sex is at least part of it.
Yeah, and so she had very long conversations about kids committing suicide if their parents don't allow them to essentially lead the way, because we follow the children. Since when, I don't know.
In what other sphere of the world? I mean, I had to laugh. I just saw yesterday there's a bill that Democrats are getting behind in the Maine state legislature to ban child marriage. I didn't realize it was a huge problem in Maine.
Me either.
What they're saying is, you can't get married at like 16, but you can make permanent decisions without your parents' knowledge about your sex and gender.
Yeah, I don't know what the Democratic Party is. They're out there just wilding. That's how I feel. Like, I don't know what is happening over there anymore.
Yeah, where are the moderate Democrats?
They're Republicans.
Right, yeah. I mean, even some of the early Obama voters, or like the people who were Democrats, when Bill Clinton Democrat.
Yeah.
It seems like in Maine at least you haven't really started to see him stand up.
I really do think, for me anyway, I sat here politically and I was never super involved in politics. I paid attention, I vote, I do the things, but I sat here and the Democratic Party has just continued to move over here, which has, I think for a lot of us, made us kind of inch this way, because we're like, this is crazy, and you almost have to double down the other way to prevent a lot of the stuff that's going on over here. And so I think that there's a shift. Like, those moderate Democrats that we once knew have truly become more conservative.
So just, I guess, talking about the political dynamic here in the state, we're obviously in the middle of the national spotlight. There's this fight going on between President Trump and Governor Mills. Personally, I think that Governor Mills picking the fight with President Trump is the best thing she ever did for the state. It's probably be right. Probably the only good thing she's ever done for the state. But it's escalated into this kind of feud in the legislature between Representative Laurel Libby, who posted an image to Facebook of a young man who had decided to compete in the female events in pole vaulting, and surprise, he wins first place and almost hits a state record. And so now it's become this kind of national fight, and Mills is really digging her heels in on this. If you'd have asked me at the onset of this how it was going to play out, I would have said that they would say, well, this is a distraction from, our core issues of, I don't know what they're doing, raising taxes or something.
Sure.
This is a distraction, we're going to comply, but we'll litigate this, just so that they could preserve the money coming in.
Sure.
But instead, by non-compliance and then saying we're going to litigate, they're going to lose funding for this. It seems like a poorly thought out fight that the Mills administration is picking here. But I just wonder what your perspective is on the watching this unfold.
I think, first of all, I'd be curious, because the post that Laurel put up, they essentially said it was inappropriate because this was a child, and I'd be curious if there would be similar action if somebody had posted that same photo celebrating.
Well, we know that that's not the case.
Right.
We know that's not the case because the Press Herald did front page spreads of a high school boy winning a girls cross country event, and no one cared. It wasn't a big thing. And we also know that they don't care really about posting pictures of minors for political purposes, because
they do it all the time.
Yeah, they do it all the time. Like they actually there was what looked like maybe a 5-year-old girl wearing a Pride Progress flag at the State House today for a protest. So we know that that's not the case, right? It was about her perspective. It was her political opinion. This was view-based discrimination against her.
1,000%, yeah. Somebody actually ostracized me for using my child as like a political ploy because he had an American flag t-shirt on. And so I find that dynamic to be interesting, but that's neither here nor there. So I personally think that this is a fight that they've decided to double down on because they don't want to say, you know, we're wrong. And this is really damaging for girls. I was an athlete in high school, and sports was like a huge part of my identity. It was sports like got me through school. And I couldn't imagine like stepping onto the basketball court with a man your size, Steve, and trying to compete for a starting position. It never would have happened. And is a starting position the most important thing? No. Sports gave me confidence. I was decent on the court. I had fun with it. People enjoyed watching me. They applauded me. It felt good.
Yeah. I mean, when you're a high school athlete, it's pretty important. It's like your world.
It is. And so these girls, I'm so proud of the girls who are speaking up. I'm sad for them that this is what their high school sports experience has been like. These kids have been through so much through COVID lockdowns, and now we're taking away like something that really is a big deal, much bigger than people say. And a lot of people say, you know, it's only a couple of transgender athletes. Well, those couple transgender athletes impact every single female athlete out there. And so I don't care if it's one. They should be playing with their biological sex. Period. And they shouldn't be in female locker rooms. It's just so bizarre that we're even having to debate this.
Yeah, it really is. I think the Attorney General from Maine, Aaron Frey, who sent that letter on Friday, kind of made the stakes clear, where they're just, I mean, I guess maybe their legal argument is just going to be that these boys aren't boys. These boys are transgender women.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Therefore, like, the words don't mean what you think they do. Up is down, 2 + 2 = 5. Therefore, we're in compliance with Title IX. That's going to be their argument.
I think you're right. I think we need to direct them to Merriam-Webster. You know, I don't know.
Although Merriam-Webster might have changed. They might have
you're probably
updated
right.
their definition to accommodate transgender ideology.
You're probably right.
So I guess the next step in your lawsuit against AOS 93 is the First District Court of Appeals ruling.
Yes.
And then whether or not you go to discovery or the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And I guess if people want to check out the Goldwater Institute, I suppose just Goldwater Institute. Just search for Goldwater Institute.
But yeah, Google them. They're amazing.
Yeah, I would say they seem like they've been great. It's a 501c3 think tank out of Arizona. I think it's part of the State Policy Network think tank, but their network. But it's good that they were able to find your case and decide to come give you the legal representation you need. Because I'm sure that this isn't something that, you know, any typical family in the state of Maine has money to spend litigating.
Definitely. And also, like, good luck finding an attorney who would take this case on. I reached out to approximately a dozen attorneys that turned my case down. Yeah, absolutely. They didn't want to touch it, to include an attorney who has a child who had a similar experience.
Really?
Yeah, and
was it an ideological thing, or did they just not want to go up against the unlimited funding of, you know, a public school system that hires Drummond Woodsum to come in?
Yes, definitely.
They've got it's kind of weird because you're paying through your property taxes to the school district for the attorneys that are defending the secret grooming of your child.
I know, and
you were paying for the child welfare agents who came to take your daughter away because you intervened in the secret grooming of your daughter by a school official.
Yeah, it makes you want to pull your hair out for sure.
And you must at times you must feel like you're taking crazy pills.
Oh,
I think of that clip from Zoolander all the time. Like, how is you not noticing this?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of, like, I have a lot of people in my personal life who are just lifelong Democrats. They just walk the party lines. And I think that people need to start to think outside of the box a little bit and stop just believing what your state rep tells you because you think that they're being honest with you. You have to start to use your own brain a little bit and start to really think about what is currently happening. It's child abuse. That's the frustrating thing, is that this is child abuse. And you mentioned Chloe Cole. Once you mention a detransitioner, anybody who believes in this ideology just shuts down.
Yeah.
Because the detransitioners are just such an anomaly to them. And
the media didn't cover Chloe Cumming. She's one of the most famous detransition activists in the world. They didn't cover her coming
Isn't it wild?
To the state to give a talk with a bunch of elected officials. They covered the event, but I think there was one outlet gave Chloe 2 paragraphs.
It's wild to me. She's such a brave young lady to be speaking and telling her story. And so many people, it doesn't happen that frequently. It goes back to, again, one time is too many, but it does happen quite a bit. And I think that as we continue on with this, because this isn't something we've been doing to children for all of eternity.
No.
So,
It's a point that Matt Walsh has made before. Is
yes.
That if kids that aren't allowed to transition are at risk of suicide, whereas this epidemic of suicidality in the 1980s and
right.
70s, where like in the 1900s, where were all these 12-year-olds committing suicide because they couldn't get cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers or something. You just didn't see it.
Right.
So that's how you know it's made up. But it is an aberration. And so it's easy to see a place where we'll be 10 years from now looking back at that was kind of weird. Like, oh no, I was always on the other side of that.
And that's what we'll hear from people. Yeah. I'm sure of it. And it is unfortunate. And so many people have said to me, you need to focus on your daughter. Why are you talking to Steve Robinson about this? Why? Because it's child abuse, and I don't want to continue to see this happen to kids. More and more you hear from people who are like, I can't breastfeed my children, or I can't have children, or I'm experiencing vaginal atrophy in my 20s. Like, that is wild and sad. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I speak out. And I do a lot of work with my daughter as well. And back to your question a while back, that's one of the best things you can do when your kid is going through this is pull them close, because there are adults who are trying to pull them away, and you have to find a way to pull them close, get them away from the adults who are pulling them away, and pull them closer to you. And it's tough because they're in a time when, your adolescence is a time where by design, we start to pull away from our parents. Mm-hmm. And so it is tough because you want to afford them the opportunity to explore and, explore their identity, remove gender from the statement, explore their identity. But these kids are a special breed of kids because there's been some significant abuse. And when I was growing up, adults telling you to keep a secret, like, the first thing you did was go tell your
stranger
parents.
Danger.
Yeah.
Right? That's big time stranger danger.
Yeah.
Now it's official school policy.
Yeah.
And like almost every school district in the state of Maine, the official policy is that school employees should be keeping secrets.
Yeah, it's wild.
And that seems to be the underlying idea here is like a philosophical belief that the school is the ultimate moral authority in an area, and that the school knows best, and the school is who's really looking out for the kids, and the parents are at risk of, I don't know, if you're included in the counseling sessions, you're gonna like beat the shit out of your daughter.
Right. I know.
Is that the idea? Is that the premise? Is that why you have to be cut out of the conversation, because you're gonna freak out and be abusive?
Yeah.
That would have to be the conclusion that they drew.
Yeah.
If they sent child welfare services.
Oh,
after
absolutely.
You.
Yeah.
How is your daughter doing now?
She's doing good. She's 15. We're looking at driver's ed, which is petrifying,
right.
But she's a sophomore in high school, getting ready to move into her junior year. We're looking at colleges. She's doing great, and she's grateful that I intervened. I feel fortunate because I know a lot of parents who have gone through this, who are estranged from their children, or their children are now adults, and they initially affirmed their child, and now that the child is an adult, they've become estranged because they kind of have doubled or backpedaled and been like, this doesn't make much sense to me. And kids are just so easily just cutting their parents out, and that's encouraged these days too. Yeah. Like, oh, your parents were toxic, just never speak to them again.
Yeah, it's almost part of the same kind of subculture, the internet subculture.
Absolutely. Glitter families. Google glitter families. It will petrify you.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's like people who will take, they are loud about it. You know, we'll take you in and take care of you. And I've spoken to some people who have navigated into glitter families, and the actual abuse that occurred in those homes is devastating. So yes, I mean, and they're on, you know, places like TikTok and stuff, making videos. We'll be your glitter family, you know. Your parents won't affirm you. Like, I'm your new mom now.
It almost seems satanic to me, but
I agree.
I don't need to go too far down that path, but it seems a little satanic. All I can think of is the guest pastor who gave the invocation for the session of the House Legislature a few weeks ago.
It is a bit. It
very
leans
weird.
that
It's
way.
like a weird bastardization of religion. But anyways, well, I appreciate you coming in. I appreciate you sticking up for your daughter. I know that couldn't have been an easy decision to make, and to continue to make, to speak out for other families and other parents who might be in the situation that you're in. You know, since you've had such a close perspective on this, I guess, do you think the tide is shifting at the school level? I mean, there's this political difference, obviously, that everybody can see, but are we starting to see change at the school level with how they think about this?
It's tough for me. My younger kids go to a Christian school.
Oh.
I mean, I'm not going to send my kids to the
Smart.
local school that I'm
Yes.
currently in
Smart.
litigation with.
Yeah.
But I think that there's strength in numbers, and I think that I do believe that a lot of teachers are frustrated with these types of policies, and they don't want to keep secrets from parents. My brother is a teacher. And so as people continue to speak out, more people feel comfortable with expressing their opinion.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a shift. Do I think it's going to be rapid? I don't. I think that Maine schools, I don't think that in my lifetime Maine schools will improve to the level in which they were when I was in public schools. But I think there's a mild shift anyway.
Well, the change from just being like normal public schools to being hyper-progressive transvestite factories was quick.
It was
So,
really quick.
It was really quick. It was like that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you've got to like take your kids out, save your kids from the public schools. Meantime, the test scores are like, you know, dropping into the dirt. So there's no reason why the fix can't be just as quick.
It would be nice. I would love that, and I'd be cautiously optimistic. But I do think that it takes one bad apple to ruin the bushel, and I do think that unfortunately, until we can extract some of these activist people out of these schools who truly believe they know what's best for our children, until we can really cherry pick those ones out, I think we're still going to experience some pretty negative stuff within schools. We really need to acknowledge that is actual child abuse, and get these people away from children. And until that happens, I don't see a shift. I would love to see a very rapid shift. We also, when all of a sudden, like, transgenderism exploded, it was right after COVID. I think parents were taken out of schools. They weren't paying as close attention. Yeah. And I think that's how they kind of slipped in. Perhaps if something rapid happens.
You can see it in the survey data that the Maine school system does, the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey data, something that we've looked at closely because it's just interesting numbers. I mean, first of all, opt your kid out of it. There's no reason why your kids should be answering all these survey questions.
Right.
Lord knows what they're doing with that data and who gets it. But we can see, for example, the obesity trends in schools, something you might want to look at if you're interested in kids' health. But at some point 10 years ago, they started asking these questions about sexuality and sexual preferences, and then came along the questions about gender, and the questions have kind of changed as what transgender ideology has changed, like the official religious doctrine of the left, as it has changed, they've started asking different questions. So you can't make perfect year-over-year comparisons, but you've kind of got this breakdown of, okay, so here are the heterosexual non-trans identifiers, and here are the people who identify as something else. And that category was consistently growing. From 2012, it was just almost an exponential growth until 2023, I think, is the most recent year that was polled, and the data was released in 2024. And it was the first year that you saw a drop in the number of people, the number of students, young people, high school level, I think, identifying as something other than trans. They've got the full panoply of the full Maine menu of selections on the survey now, I'm sure.
It's wild.
But there does seem to be a little bit of a trend moving back away from it, where it's almost like it's no longer cool to be poly anymore.
Right, yeah.
Everybody's poly. Now we're borderline. Like, oh, you're borderline? Well, I'm just a healthy, well-adjusted Christian.
That's not cool.
When is that going to be countercultural?
I know.
I think in some ways that's becoming
I think
the
you're right.
countercultural rebellion for some of the younger Gen Zers. They've certainly learned a healthy distrust in government between COVID and some of the other things that have happened.
I've met a couple of them, and you might be right. Being Christian might become cool. It might become counterculture.
I think it's cool.
I do too, but yeah, it's like any other fad. You see this spike and then a decline. Unfortunately, this fad in particular is really harmful for kids, whereas when I was a kid and the goth kids, wore black and made devil horns out of their hair, not so harmful.
You're such a Gen X there. It's such a Gen X thing. Yeah, the trends certainly seem to have changed.
And that's reversible, unlike puberty blockers like they want to claim. You can wash the red dye out of your hair and let your hair grow out again so you don't look silly, but puberty blockers are not something that's reversible. So I like that the numbers are decreasing. It's a positive thing. I'm hearing that from teachers too. I've heard from several teachers who have said, I don't have as many transgender students this year. I don't have to play the pronoun game as much as I did last year,
Yeah, I mean, and if you looked at the data, and I know others have found this looking at data in other states and nationally, the trend's driven almost entirely by young women identifying as bisexual. So it's kind of this easily reversible, non-committal thing where you can just say, well, I'm also part of the out group. Like I'm not one of the traditional normal people. I'm also trendy. I'm bisexual.
Right.
So that category seems to be shrinking quite a bit. So we'll see, I guess, when the next batch of data comes out. But the politically, anyways, the state, it doesn't seem like we're going to be seeing any changes whatsoever. There's a number of bills that would allow or require compliance with Title IX, that would force curriculum transparency, that would strengthen parental rights in education. But I do not think that in this environment any of those are likely to prevail.
I agree. I spend a fair amount of time over at the State House speaking for or against specific bills. And one thing I find really bizarre is that the Democratic Party just really doesn't want to have a nuanced conversation with anybody. They don't want to speak to you if you disagree. I did have one, the last bill I spoke for, it was the Parents' Rights Bill. Jennifer Portier, I believe, was the sponsor. It didn't go anywhere, of course, but I did have one Democrat follow me out after I spoke and ask me questions. She spoke down to me a little bit, which I'm okay with.
That might be a lawmaker thing, not necessarily a Democrat thing or a you thing.
Maybe, perhaps, you're right. But I can answer questions about this stuff in just about any crowd of a room. I've done my research. I've spoken to many, many people, professionals, who know what's going on here. And so I had no problem chatting with her, but you could tell it was almost like she was doing it as like a courtesy, like, oh, I will pretend to entertain you for a moment.
Signal
yes.
Just going through the motions.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I agree. We're not going to see much of a shift anytime soon. But I do believe that when elections roll around, we'll be in good shape, because Mills has really made a mess over there, and I firmly believe that a lot of people who voted for her are gonna swing the other way.
Are there any elected people, I guess, who have been particularly helpful? I know you're in a pretty blue part of the state. Is your state senator Cameron Rennie?
Yes.
Yeah.
She has not been helpful.
She doesn't like me very much. She's a huge fan of 9-month abortions, but not a very big fan of me.
Yeah, I bet she's not. Yeah. So Heidi Sampson, who was termed out, she has been amazing. Reagan Paul has been great. I don't want to miss anyone. Geez, Barbara Bagshaw has been lovely. Rachel Henderson, Mike Solbliski, a bunch of them, you know. Like I said, I don't want to miss anybody, and I'm sure I'm missing. I know I am.
I'm sorry, that's an awful spot to put you in. I should ask that question.
It's okay. It's okay. A lot of state reps have reached out just to offer support or like ask if they can help, or have reached out to say, hey, will you come speak? Which I appreciate, because I try to follow what's going on there, but I'm a business owner and a mom of 3, and sometimes I just don't have time to look and see what...
You're busy protecting your kids from these...
That too, yeah.
Social workers.
Yes, social workers. So I like when, Representative Portier reached out and said, hey, will you come? I like when people do that, because then it takes the research work away from me.
Yeah, well, it can be a very opaque process, even for us, where we're kind of like, it's our job to be looking at the calendar, and they intentionally pull tricks to try to diminish turnout for bills that they don't want having high turnout. So it's a funny game. It's a funny game.
It is a funny game, and I didn't realize how funny it was until I really started to show up over there. It's frustrating. I remember one bill, I sat in front of the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee, and one of the bills was to put a liaison, I don't remember the ins and outs, a DHHS liaison within schools. And I'm like, eek, like that feels really yucky. I don't like this at all.
Need that?
And the Republicans on the committee voted to put the bill on the floor. And I was like, what are you guys doing? And they were like, well, these representatives agreed to vote yes or no for this bill for us. So we voted yeah. And I'm like, this is why I hate politics. It's so frustrating, because think about that, a liaison for DHHS just sitting in schools. Like, what a mess that would create. So I don't know what actually happened to that bill. I think it got shot down,
well, the bill probably got shot down, and then the Mills administration just figured out a way to do it anyways.
Probably.
It's probably what happened. Just a random guess based on patterns.
Yeah.
Is there any like a state Senate candidacy, a state Senate announcement in your future?
Oh gosh, no. No, sir. No. I don't have time for that. I wouldn't be good at it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't, but I will support our representatives, because it's what they do is tough work.
Yeah.
It really is. So no, not for me. I'll continue to be an activist in my own terms.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that things are going well for you and for your daughter.
Thank you.
And I think it's a fantastic story that doesn't get enough attention and needs more attention, because again, back to where we started, there was this forked road, and there was the easy path that everybody, the powerful people in the state or in your community would have told you to take, and then there was the path that you took, which was to protect your daughter and to trust your instincts. And I think that the last, has it been 2-3 years now?
Yeah, December 2022 is when it erupted.
Yeah.
So yeah,
coming up on it'll be 3 years in December. So I mean, I think the last couple of years have kind of borne out have testified to the prudence of your actions, I should say.
Yeah. Not easy, but people like you make it a touch easier for sure. People who actually want to talk about this story and tell the actual truth, because I've had other news outlets reach out to me, and foolishly I'll be like, sure, I'll talk to you.
Yeah, well, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do a setup like this, and it's like other podcasters have said it, that the longer format helps you like get into topics much better.
Definitely.
Whereas with the news clips, it's like Amber Levine was being investigated for child abuse, and then they pan over him like, and there she is laughing like a crazy person about her child abuse.
Yes, absolutely, and I like
more at 7.
I like the in-person too. I've done several podcasts via Zoom. I have a hard time with the Zoom format.
Yeah.
I do it. I've done it with people, but I like to sit down. So this is a nice setup. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, we had you on, Maine Wire TV, which was one of our first iterations of trying to do something like this. But now that we've got an actual studio, I agree that the in-person interview, there's just something you miss out on. Just like in remote learning, you miss out on some visual cues and some social cues.
You sure do.
You don't get that if you're just doing a Zoom podcast. Besides, everyone went through COVID and they're used to just like staring up at people's nostrils. So nobody wants to watch more Zoom meetings.
No,
Nobody wants that.
No.
But Amber, thank you very much for coming in
Yeah,
and
thanks for
talking
having me
with us today.